So with that, let's get started. I'm really delighted to present Dr. William Harris, who's the president and CEO. And the name of your company, I'm sorry, I'm not fluent on it, but
Omega Quant.
Omega Quant. I mean, if you look at human health, forget the statins. Every membrane is whether it's a bone or brain cell, phospholipid bilayer. We need to have these raw materials to be healthy. And I think what Dr. Harris has done for us has brought science to the value of fish oils. And there are many naysayers out there on fish oil, and I won't mention their names, but everybody has a way to make a shtick. But there's no question that fish oil is extremely important. And before Dr. Harris, you came on, I talked about a study in 1848, British hospitals treating consumption. And they were given between 15 and 60 grams of cod liver oil a day. And they were reducing mortality from consumption, severe coughing blood tuberculosis by doing fish oil, by giving high dose fish oil. So that's how profound it is. There's no naysaying when it comes to the need for fish oil. And wow. I think what Dr. Harris brings to the table is not only a knowledge of it and all its health benefits and consequences, but also a way so you can truly understand, are you doing the right thing? Because like I said, before you came on, we do a survey and asking about fish oil supplementation and fish consumption is part of that. And people will say, yeah, I eat a lot of fish. And then you ask them, it's like, oh, once or twice a month, I eat a lot of fish. It's like,
right.
You're going to give us a whole new definition of what a proper consumption is, and do we not need supplementation. So it's a really, really important topic. I think it's one of, second to the gut microbiome and absorbing well, getting enough fish oils in your diet is right there. When you look at the Japanese, it's the longest lived culture, and the amount of fish oils and fish and sea vegetables that they take in. So with that, Dr. Harris, let me give you full access to the screen, which I haven't done yet. And
looks like I've got it.
Good.
I'll just
fire away. Very exciting topic.
All right. So you can see this, folks?
Yes. I see it, so everybody
see my mouse move?
Yep.
Good deal. Okay, we're in good shape. All right. Well, as you can tell, I'm in South Dakota. Well, that's where these guys are. I'm muting going on.
I'm working on that on my end. I'll mute them as they come in.
Okay, good. Credentials, Ph.D. in nutrition some years ago, and I've been in 3 medical school faculties. I'm currently at University of South Dakota, Department of Medicine. So I started Omega Quant Analytics about 12 years ago, a laboratory to analyze omega-3 levels in blood. And we'll see a little more about that later. And a couple of years ago, we formed a research institute, Fatty Acid Research Institute, to explore in more depth fatty acid relations with health. So this talk, I've just kind of calling it an overview of health and longevity and omega-3. So it's kind of a potpourri of different stuff. We'll talk about, first of all, the omega-3 index, the test Tom's talking about, and then what the data is about omega-3 and longevity, heart disease, autoimmune disease, Alzheimer's, exercise and joint pains, a little bit of eye health, and COVID. So we're going to go fast over a lot of important conditions here. So what's the omega-3 index? The omega-3 index is a blood test. It's a measurement in red blood cell membranes of the amount of EPA and DHA. So this cartoon here shows a cutaway of a red cell lipid bilayer, phospholipids, inner layer, outer layer. And in this cartoon, I got 4 omega-3s out of 64 fatty acids. The fatty acids are the hanging down things here. 64 fatty acids, 4 of them are EPA or DHA, so 4 out of 64 is 6.25%. So that's what the omega-3 index would be. It's simply a measure of what percent of the total fatty acids in the membrane are EPA and DHA. And it's a very simple concept. Conceptually, it's a lot like the hemoglobin A1C. as a long-term stable biomarker of omega-3 status measured in a red cell and expressed as a percent. So all those things together make it pretty similar to an A1C, but it's an omega-3 A1C. When we first proposed this in 2004, almost 20 years ago now, we were searching for what's the proper target level for the omega-3 index, and we looked at a variety of studies that were available at that time in the literature. And I'm not going to go over all these studies by any means, but we took what we either the reported or the estimated omega-3 index from all these observational studies or interventional studies, and we found that as you just take an average across all these studies of about 8.1% was associated with the greatest protection. So we just chose a desirable range, 8% to, I said earlier, to 12%. 12% is kind of simply a round number. We're going up by 4%. And that's higher than actually it is in Japan, but Japan is typically in the 8, 9, 10% area because they eat so much fish. And as Tom mentioned, they're the longest living group roughly on the planet. There's probably no coincidence there. We don't know that there's any upper limit from a adverse health outcome at this point. Most people in America, Europe are down here in this intermediate zone of 4 to 6% roughly. And there's a few people down here in the very undesirable range, which is essentially vegans and U.S. military, sorry to say.
Wow.
Yeah, but that's the way that goes. Here's what our basic report looks like. So again, it gives you that sliding scale and it gets green up here. These are very familiar. Our range, desirable range is 8 to 12%. The reference range is simply 99th percentile of the population. So, we like to put that in there, but there's nothing, we don't imply that there's any health benefit to be at 15%. Again, if you're over 8%, you're in good shape. Most people in America are well under 8%. Only about 5% of every group we ever do is over 8%. A lot of factors can affect it, genetics, which is always sort of a trash basket term, but nobody really knows what it means. But in any event, we certainly can track dosage levels by how much the omega-3 index moves. So here's the first data slide I want to show you. It's a study we did a few years ago at OmegaQuant. We received this is based on about 3,500 blood samples that we received. These are all dried blood spots. Most of our work is done in dried blood spots. And these 3,500 people that were submitting blood from really around the world. And we had asked them 2 questions. We asked them, were they taking a fish oil supplement? Yes or no, without getting any more detail than that. And we asked them how often they eat what we call oily fish meals. That's not shrimp and catfish, by the way. This would be things like salmon, mackerel, herring, sardines, those types of fish that are rich in omega-3, rich in oil and rich in omega-3. So we asked them how much they were eating, and we asked them if they took a supplement or not. And then we looked at what the omega-3 index was. And if you focus, first of all, on the light blue, the people that were not taking omega-3 supplements. So people who were reported no fish consumption and weren't taking a supplement, their omega-3 index was about 4%, as expected. But then just as a sanity check for the test, as fish consumption goes up, the omega-3 index goes up. That's the way it should be. A valid test should respond to a changing input. People who are on supplements reporting some kind of supplement use were the dark blue bars, and their levels also went up with each level. But note they were roughly a couple of units, omega-3 index units higher than people who were in the same fish intake category but didn't take supplements. So supplements typically raise levels a couple points. A couple of additional things here. Typical recommendations of places like the American Heart Association: eat fish 2 times a week. If you do that and you don't take supplements, your omega-3 index is under 6%. So that's not quite where you need to be. It's not good enough. The other point to make here is the only group that had an average omega-3 index, of 8% was the people that ate fish 3 times a week and took a supplement. So it's doable. It's not common in America to do this, but it's certainly doable. And people, as you can see here with the people who are not taking supplements, the average was 7.1 with a big standard deviation. So there are people just eating fish, not taking supplements, who have a healthy omega-3 index. It's doable. A lot of people just don't like fish is the problem. So what affects how an omega-3, supplement responds to a dose, responds to your blood level. First of all, again, eating fish regularly, of course, increases omega-3 levels. And that's one of the strongest forms or strongest drivers of omega-3 levels. The form of an omega-3 supplement is important. Is it an ethyl ester? Is it a triglyceride? Ethyl esters are typically not as well absorbed. Triglycerides are better absorbed. Phospholipids are well absorbed. So you need to know what kind it is. Do you take supplement with food? If you take it with food, it's going to help absorb regardless of the form, particularly helpful if you're taking an ethyl ester. Having it with food is very important. And fitness, this is kind of interesting. Have you embarked on a new fitness routine? Intense exercise does appear to decrease the omega-3 index acutely anyway. So there's maybe a burning or using of omega-3s in that setting. So all these things can affect the response to a supplement. So now let's move into some disease conditions. I'm not sure you call this longevity or a lack of longevity, I guess would be a disease. But I wanted to show a couple slides, a couple studies. This is a study from the UK Biobank, a very fruitful cohort of individuals assembled about 10 years ago in Great Britain, followed for health conditions. About almost 500,000 people were recruited for this between roughly age 40 and 70. And this, one of the many, many questions they asked was about their habitual use of fish oil supplements. So 10 years later, these researchers looked at the question of people who said they were taking supplements. About a third of the people in this UK Biobank reported taking supplements. And they looked at the risk for all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality, MI, stroke, CV events, et cetera, all these things. And here is their final outcome. This is modeled. This is the most multivariable controlled model. And there's significant reductions in risk for total mortality. So 0.87 hazard ratio here means that people who were taking supplements compared to people who were not were 13% less likely to die in the follow-up period.
And Dr. Harris, that would be an absolute or relative percentage?
Relative. So it's just a 13% less chance. If 100 people died in 10-year follow-up who were not taking supplements, then 87 people would have died in the supplement group. The actual numbers, do they have? So basically 1% looks like, no, it doesn't make sense. That's percentages. I need to look at this a little more carefully because this.
That's okay, but I think the message is.
Yeah, it's reduced risk. I mean, exactly how much reduced risk, and again, we don't even know how well they were really taking supplements. They might have been just taking it once a week and calling it good, which is a problem. In any event, here's some evidence that for a variety of adverse outcomes, taking supplements is associated with lower risk for these disease outcomes. This is the paper I want to go over. We published last year. This is a meta-analysis of using blood omega-3 fatty acid levels and looking at total and cause-specific mortality in 17 prospective cohort studies. So this was a big meta-analysis, all based on not food frequency questionnaires or reported intake, but measuring blood levels of omega-3. So in this study, we included 17 studies that were done in 10 different countries. About 43,000 people were involved across these trials. And these are studies like the Framingham study, the Women's Health Initiative, or the MESA or EPIC, or these are just observational cohort studies, not interventions. The average age was 64, about half were women. The median follow-up time was about 16 years between blood sampling and when the end of the study was, so that we're looking for events that happen in that 16-year window. Roughly between age 64 and add 16 to 64, you get about 80. So between 64 and 80 is the time window we're looking for events to occur. Almost 16,000 deaths occurred among these people. 30% were cardiovascular, 30% were cancer, and about 40% was everything else, all pooled together. And so we asked the question, how did omega-3 levels drawn at baseline associate with these different outcomes? And this is what we found. I'm just going to show you this by quintile. So what we have here is these colored bars show the different quintiles of omega-3 levels in these people at baseline. So the dark blue is the lowest omega-3 quintile, the lowest 20%. And the light blue is the highest 20%. And so for all-cause mortality here, you can see that for each increasing level of omega-3 in the blood, the risk for dying in that 16-year window went down and down and down and down. So there was again, roughly about if you look over here, 0.8, 0.83, maybe 17% less likely to die if you're in this cohort than this one. But we also look at other causes of death. Cardiovascular disease death, same pattern. And these p-values are for the trends across. Cancer, not as strong, but there's certainly a signal there that higher omega-3 associated with lower risk. And interestingly, this kind of trash can term of all other causes of death combined. So this is everything. There was even a relationship there, a strong one. We're here at the highest endpoint. Highest omega-3 level is highly significant reduction in risk for death. So the omega-3s are affecting odds for dying from all causes, not just cardiovascular, not just heart disease. All kinds of diseases are being affected by this. And if we want to know kind of what's the difference between quintile 1 and quintile 5 in omega-3 index term is down here. It's roughly, quintile 1 is roughly about a 3.6% omega-3 index. And quintile 5 is about 7.8, so roughly about that 8% target that we set originally. So this is good support for that. Let me go on to cardiovascular disease. Just a couple slides here. Again, another kind of meta-analysis. Here's of 10 studies that we did about 5 years ago now. We're looking at the omega-3 index as a predictor of risk for fatal coronary heart disease. And if you compare people in the right around 4% to people at 8%, the risk reduction is about 35%. So again, a significantly reduced risk of atherosclerotic heart disease death with a higher omega-3 index. These are data that just came out of a lab in Boston, the Boston Heart Lab. They've been analyzing omega-3 levels for some time. And they got a lot of data. So here's data from 1.17 million people over the last several years. And here what they did was they took omega-3 levels and looked at state by state. They had so much data they could look, each one of these dots is a different state in the United States. And so across the y-axis is the estimated omega-3 index. I converted their numbers to my numbers. And so, as you can see, the higher the omega-3 index is, the lower the heart disease rate. Heart disease mortality rates down here. And people with higher levels of omega-3 are lower risk for heart disease. As your omega-3 index drops lower and lower, your risk for heart disease goes up and up. So this just confirms again, it's been done so many times now. Higher omega-3 levels are always associated with reduced risk for cardiovascular disease. Let me jump into an autoimmune disease. This is a paper just published this year, BMJ 2022. This is in a large cohort, a large randomized trial called VITAL. And there are several studies that are coming out of this VITAL study. It was a big one done in the United States, done through Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Joanne Manson was the PI. And they recruited about 26,000 men and women who were free of heart disease or cancer at baseline. Men over 50, women over 55. They were randomized 4 ways. So it was a 2-by-2 randomized trial. They were given either 1 capsule of Lovesa, which is one of the prescription omega-3 products, contained 840 milligrams of EPA and DHA, ethyl ester. So it's not a big dose, 1 pill. But why they use small dose, well, it's a long discussion. Convenience, compliance, yada, yada. A placebo, a vitamin D was also in this mix. So it was an omega-3 and vitamin D trial, 2,000 IU of vitamin D or placebo. So there are 4 groups. 1 group got omega-3 and a vitamin D placebo. 1 got omega-3 and vitamin D. 1 got vitamin D and omega-3 placebo. And then the final group got double placebos. Okay, followed up for 5 years. This particular report is on incident autoimmune diseases. Primary outcome in the study was heart disease or cancer death. That's what they were primarily looking at. But there's like 30 other outcomes they're now publishing on that were secondary outcomes. So they reported autoimmune diseases occurring, and they have some were by medical record confirmation, or some were called probable autoimmune disease. That's an MD was diagnosed the disease, but they couldn't confirm it with testing. Hospital data wasn't there, but that's what the MD thought. So here's what they found. This column over here is confirmed autoimmune disease. This is confirmed and probable autoimmune disease incidence over the 5 years of follow-up. So here's the omega-3 arm. The blue is everybody was on omega-3, whether they're on vitamin D or not. And for confirmed, and you can see a difference. Obviously, the omega-3 is the lower group, less likely to develop it, but it wasn't quite significant. If you look at confirmed and probable outcomes, then the omega-3 is 0.04, high, statistically significant reduction. Down here, this is interesting, breaks it out by all 4 treatment groups. And so the pink dotted line is the double placebo group. So this is the rate at which autoimmune disease is formed without any treatment at all. Then whether you got vitamin D alone, vitamin D with omega-3, or omega-3 alone, your outcome was pretty much the same, significant reduction in risk. But vitamin D and omega-3 seemed to do the same thing. They didn't add to each other. But there was, again, here in a randomized trial in healthy people, reduced risk for developing autoimmune diseases. The authors concluded that this trial of older adults in the U.S. found that vitamin D and omega-3 supplementation for 5 years reduced incident autoimmune disease compared with no supplementation. The clinical importance of this trial is high because these are well-tolerated, non-toxic supplements, and other effective treatments to reduce the incidence of autoimmune disease are lacking. So that, I think, is an important finding and adds to the story. So next, jump into dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Of course, each one of these categories is a whole talk, but we haven't got time for all that. So we're doing a potpourri today. Here's a paper we just published ourselves in Nutrients. Alex Salavila is one of our research scientists. Red blood cell DHA levels predict risk for incident dementia and Alzheimer's disease in Framingham. So what we did was we looked at the DHA levels in red cells. So again, the red blood cell, the omega-3 index is EPA plus DHA. DHA constitutes about 85% of that total. So we're looking here at the red blood cell DHA level. And we're focused on DHA because that's really the brain fatty acid on the omega-3 side. So we had data on red cell DHA in about 1,500 people in Framingham over the age of 65 who did not have dementia at baseline when blood samples were taken. Their average age was 73 years. We tracked them for the development of dementia or Alzheimer's disease over the next 7.3 years. And so what we found was basically this, that the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease over an average of 7.3 years as a function of DHA. If we look at these are quintiles of omega-3, red cell DHA. Lowest quintile is our reference group. 29 people in this group developed Alzheimer's disease. If you go down to the highest DHA levels, 19 people developed Alzheimer's disease. And that is roughly a hazard ratio 0.51, roughly a 50% reduction in risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. All-cause dementia was our second outcome. There's a few more cases here. 35 people in quintile 1, 26 people in quintile 5, roughly 44% reduction in risk here, was also highly significant. And if we just look at the rate of development, we're just comparing the people in the lowest quintile, the pink line, and the teal line here is the people in the highest quintile. So this is how the Alzheimer's disease incidence was. So we show again, and this is not by any means the first demonstration of this, that higher omega-3 levels do predict a slower rate of development of Alzheimer's. So that's a good thing. Exercise and joint pain. We'll jump to this one. I like this particular study. In this particular study, it was done by also out of the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Joanne Welty was the first author, or the senior author here. But this is a study where they treated 291 people who had stable coronary heart disease with 4 grams, with 4 capsules of Lovesa, which is 3.4 grams of EPA ethyl ester, or not. There was no placebo. It was just a control group that didn't get them. Their primary outcome was actually looking at the rate of change of coronary artery calcification. That was their primary purpose of the study, and its omega-3 supplements slowed that. But they looked at a variety of other outcomes as well. And here they're looking at physical function. And what they're reporting here is the percent change, mean percent change from baseline in pain scale. So the placebo group got worse over the 1 year of treatment. This is 291 people treated for a year. The Lovesa group, omega-3, very little change. This is significantly different. 0.06 is close enough for a small study. Stiffness was down, physical function was improved, and Womack score is kind of an arthritis score. These two were strongly affected by omega-3. Interestingly, this is the minutes of exercise that they reported at baseline, the control group in black and the omega-3 group in gray. At baseline, they were both doing about 150 minutes a week of exercise, they reported. At the end of 1 year, the control group had not changed, but the omega-3 group now was doing almost 200 minutes of exercise a week. So there was a significant increase in exercise. And also, interestingly, after 30 months of follow-up, they observed there were 11 controls had a knee or hip replacement. Only one person in the omega-3 had a knee or hip replacement. So this is an observation here that this research group is following up on to see if they can actually reduce the need for knee and hip replacement by giving omega-3 to people. Interesting finding. But they concluded high-dose EPA DHA may benefit at least coronary artery disease patients, probably anybody, by preserving physical function, increasing exercise, reducing joint replacement. They may be safe preventive strategies against musculoskeletal symptoms, again, in CAD patients. Okay, moving up kind of above the neck, the eyes. Again, here's another sub-study from VITAL. We talked about that study a moment ago. Vitamin D and omega-3, 26,000 people randomized, and now we're looking at incident macular degeneration. And what they showed here was that the omega-3 group, which is the blue line, had a statistically significantly reduced risk for developing macular degeneration compared to placebo, and interestingly, compared to the vitamin D and omega-3 combination group. That's the gray line up here, which is kind of odd. A little hard to understand. Vitamin D alone was almost statistically significant. The omega-3 group was significant, but when you combined the vitamin D and omega-3, then you lost the effect. So there's a puzzle. Nobody's figured that out yet. But the bottom line of this from an omega-3 point of view is giving omega-3s to people who are healthy and who had healthy eyes to begin with over a 7-year period reduced risk for macular degeneration development. Let me jump into COVID-19. We got to talk about that, of course. These are not data from me. These were published by a group called Vivar Severa last year. Interesting observation that they looked worldwide fatality from COVID-19, and they compared it to reported intake of EPA and DHA in different regions around the world. And these are the number of countries that were in each region. If they plotted the average marine omega-3 intake on this axis and the fatality rate from COVID on this axis. Pretty interesting relationship. This certainly is not definitive by any means, but it's an interesting observation that supports the idea that omega-3s could be helpful in in COVID. The highest intake groups had the lowest levels of death from COVID-19. There's other data on this as well. We published one of the first studies on this in beginning of 2021, actually. We studied 100 patients who were admitted to the hospital, Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. We had omega-3 index levels measured on all 100 patients. The average omega-3 was only 5.1%. One person had almost a 14%, but almost everybody else was quite low, about 5%. And we asked the question, was the omega-3 level related to risk for death in the hospital? And what we found, we looked at the omega-3 index kind of by quartiles. And this is probably the most important part down here, the last 3 lines. When we compared quintile 1 versus, quintile 4, meaning the highest omega-3 level, to the people who had quintile 1 through 3. So the highest 75%, the highest 25% to the lowest 75% of people. We found that people in quartile 4, which was over 5.7%, had a relative risk of dying of COVID that was about 75% lower than the people who had lower omega-3 indexes. Again, this was not quite statistically significant, but if you remember back in those early days of COVID, we were publishing anything we could find that was even a hint of benefit. Because again, this is quite a small study with only 100 people. This has been replicated. A couple of studies in Chile using the omega-3 index have also reported the same basic idea. So why would omega-3 fatty acids have anything to do with COVID? A lot of reasons. And we're not going to go over this lovely diagram of the molecular pathways by which omega-3s operate. I just want to highlight a few of them down here. The omega-3 fatty acids do give rise to a whole series of eicosanoids, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, et cetera, that come from the omega-3 fatty acid instead of the omega-6 or arachidonic acid. And all these are typically anti-inflammatory molecules. If you've got high levels of omega-3 on board, you will make these molecules instead of making the arachidonate-derived molecules, and that will reduce risk for inflammation. Also, if you can inhibit this particular transcription factor, NF-kappa B, which is sort of the gatekeeper of all inflammation, the omega-3s will block NF-kappa B translocation and stop an inflammatory system from expanding. And also the omega-3s up here on the right, outside of the cell, the omega-3s can produce these things called resolvins and protectins, merasins. This is a whole series of molecules that are called inflammation resolving mediators. And they are molecules that, again, come from the omega-3s if they're present. And these things will actively suppress inflammation once it's begun. It'll resolve inflammation. So all these systems are very good at explaining why omega-3s might work. There's one more novel outcome. This has been reported now by a couple of groups. This was the Vivar Severa group. They observed that having omega-3 fatty acids in the system will actually hold the spike protein in what's called a closed position. So here's low omega-3 levels, and this panel over here, here is the familiar COVID cartoon that everybody's familiar with. The spike protein on the surface interacts with the ACE inhibitor, ACE2, and the ACE2 receptor is brought into the cell, and then all these inflammatory proceedings go on. If you've got high DHA and EPA in the blood, then the spike protein is held in kind of a closed conformation, a locked conformation, and it will not interact or not be picked up by the ACE2 receptor as well. Therefore, the amount of virus that actually gets moved into the cell would be reduced if you've got higher omega-3. So this is a novel thing for which we actually now have some evidence epidemiologically that we've just submitted for publication. So I can't really share that now, but let me wrap up here. I think the current evidence supports the hypothesis of higher omega-3 index, higher omega-3 blood levels, slow the rate of aging, reduce the risk for premature death, which is, I guess, the same thing as saying that. Lower risk for autoimmune disease development, slow the development of dementia, improve joint health, make exercising easier. Seen to preserve macular function and may protect against major adverse outcomes from COVID. And with that, I don't know what time it is, but I will wrap it up. Here's
That's amazing, Dr. Harris. You can click off the viewer so we can see you, but unfortunately, I'm going to chime in here.
Oh, no.
And chide my audience. Okay, because there's all this conversation of rancidity. Let me ask the audience a question. What is your olfactory sense for rancid fish oils? And what is your olfactory sense for carbon monoxide, which can kill you? So smelling a little rancidity doesn't mean there's no correlation of toxicity. It's in fact part per billion. The British study, they didn't have refrigeration back then. I can guarantee you the fish oils were rancid. The Vikings put cod liver oil on their fingers and it relieved arthritis, okay? That elegant diagram that Dr. Harris showed, okay? We think reductionist, so we put in the omega and there's some oxidized stuff and it just sits there oxidized. We burn calories for a reason, iodine and iodide, two different forms. We don't necessarily have to take the right one because our body can do redox. Everything is redox, okay? Think about a iron. It rusts, oxidizes. Everything's giving an electron, taking an electron away. We put zinc on it, galvanized. Now the iron doesn't rust because the zinc takes the hit for the iron. The fish oils are taking the hit for you. And the data, these large studies are unequivocal. Do not worry about rancidity whatsoever. It's irrelevant because your body will affect oxidation or reduction to get to the right form, the safe form. Trust your body to do the right thing. The elegant thing on resolvents, what is it doing? It's resolving inflammation. It's taking the oxidative hit for you. You're breathing 20.9% oxygen. Why aren't you decaying instantly? Because you are able to convert things that will do redox for you and quell the inflammatory storm. So I've seen this over and over and over again, so people don't take fish oils or they're afraid of them because of a little rancidity. And it's, you're making a big mistake in terms of longevity. Just look at the Japanese. Do you want to live 7 years longer, healthy? Then take your fish oils, because that's what that culture does. The Koreans are seeing the longest increase in longevity. So it's not founded in good science. And I've seen, a couple of the comments there. Has there ever been a study on rancid fish oils? And I guarantee you're going to get good, first of all, the rancidity is going to be minuscule. I don't even refrigerate mine because you put the cover on, the soluble oxygen, the amount of oxidation is minimal. And I know my body can do more than just oxidation. I know what my body, my physiology can also do a reduction. So if you follow these so-called rancid things through your system, I guarantee you that our body is managing it through very complex chemistry that Dr. Harris showed on that slide. Anyway, that's my chiding. Take your fish oil. Dr. Harris, any comment on that? And then we'll go through some other questions.
There actually have been studies on the adverse impact or the looking for adverse impact of highly oxidized fish oils. And people really oxidized the hell out of a bunch of fish oil and gave it to human subjects for several weeks, and it didn't do anything to them. They measured every metric they could find. It didn't hurt.
Exactly. You're going to follow the chemistry. If you think something goes into your body and it's just used in that form, you're not a chicken. You take in chicken protein. You're not inserting chicken protein into your DNA. You're breaking it down to amino acids and then rebuilding it. Have faith in your body and just look at the overarching big data. You know, that's the important thing.
So there's a bunch of questions here. I don't know if you want me to go through these or.
Yes, please do. I mean, you fire away and pick them as you see fit.
Sure, yeah. Specific kinds of warnings about specific kinds of fish consumption strontium in bones of large sea fish. I don't know anything about that point, but I don't think we should be eating the bones of large sea fish. Again, some of the best sources of omega-3 are salmon, which are very low in toxicity and toxic things. Now, 10 years ago, there was a big blow up about salmon and farming and some of the pollutants in there, but that's been cleaned up very much now. And it wasn't actually all that bad in the first place.
But will the farm raised salmon have as much omega-3, the ones that are fed grains, compared to the wild caught?
They used to have more omega-3 than the wild caught because they fed them more omega-3 than the wild caught, and the farm didn't. Actually, I prefer the term ranched. Actually, they're not growing them like farms; they're ranching them like cattle. But anyway, they don't burn off the energy, so they actually store more fat and more omega-3 in the farm. But nowadays, you're right; they're substituting vegetable oils down. They're reducing some of the because fish oil is getting so expensive. They're putting less in, but now roughly the same amount of omega-3 per serving in wild versus a farmed. Used to be higher in farm, now it's not anymore.
It's just proof that I always tell my folks, where did you learn that? Okay. And don't just someone's opinion, they have to have the data to support their thesis. And, I just read a bunch of stuff on rancidity. And there's nothing really factual. It's all sort of, it's really opinion in my opinion.
It's theoretical, right? Fermented fish oils are better. I don't think fermented fish oils are better. I don't know much about fermented fish oils, to tell you the truth.
There was a big controversy on the blue, I forget what the blue something or other. But what I do, Dr. Harris, is, I take cod liver oil and I rotate 4 brands because I can't go and audit the plant. So I do Nordic Naturals, I do Carlson's as liquid. The Rosita is what Weston A. Price Foundation recommends. I do that as capsules. And then every once in a while, I'll do the fermented just to mix it up a little bit. And I also eat a wide variety of fish types, not just sardines and salmon.
What's your
I eat them every day.
What's your omega-3 index? Or do you know?
My omega-3 index is, that's what it is.
Yeah. Get back to me on that.
Yeah, I'd love to get it tested because I eat a lot of fish. I mean, I'll be having smoked salmon as soon as we're done today.
Okay. Why isn't DPA part of the index? DPA is the 22 carbon 5 double bond intermediate between EPA and DHA. Because it doesn't add any, number one, it's metabolically controlled. It's not from diet. And number two, it doesn't add any risk prediction to what we already know from EPA and DHA. So it really wasn't there.
Now, if you go down in arachidonic acid type omega-6s, does that increase the omega-3 score that you're giving, or does it stay the same?
Not really. If you don't eat any more omega-3, it might. Dropping your omega-6 down that's a whole nother lecture.
I understand, but
yeah, and I'm not against omega-6s. I think they're fine. The problem in America is lack of omega-3, and it's so easy to get distracted and leave the omega-3s behind, just worry about your omega-6s. But the omega-6s
The same is true about sodium salt and potassium salt, but the issue isn't too much sodium, it's a lack of potassium. Same thing.
Same idea. Here's a question, ApoE4 status and omega-3 intake. Yeah, we've looked at people with ApoE4 genotype, which puts people at higher risk for dementia, and it does appear that their need for omega-3 is higher to achieve the same kind of risk reduction than people who are not ApoE4 positive.
Keep in mind that these genomic type things are tendencies that you can overcome with the proper behavior. I've read all of Stephanie Seneff's stuff about the ApoE4 and its titration to Alzheimer's, which I've spent a lot of time on. And the data is not as hard and fast as you think, the double 4 allele. So if you have a double 4 allele and you have root canals, the root canal is a much bigger factor for dementia than the ApoE4.
Interesting. Yeah, it's certainly not a death sentence by any means.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why did the prescription use of ethyl ester form, why is it not well absorbed? Ethyl esters are not particularly natural forms of fatty acids. There are enzymes in our gut that can break them down into absorbable forms, but they were originally developed because you can provide more omega-3 per capsule, more concentrated products. And they work. They just don't work quite as well particularly if you don't eat them with food, particularly with fats. Are omega-3 is a mild anticoagulant? Yes, they do thin the blood and in a good way. They don't increase risk for bleeding, clinically significant bleeding.
What drives me crazy is that some doctors won't prescribe fish oils to pregnant women because they're preparing to do a C-section. The woman doesn't know that, and then, Lions Calling Institute talks about this as well. It's tell your doctor not to be lazy. I'm taking in this much fish oil. This is my omega quant score. Adjust if I need to have a blood thinner. Adjust the dose based on this. Don't tell me to stop taking fish oil. It's crazy.
Yeah, right. And we and others have written reviews looking at the literature. There really is no increased risk for bleeding. True. Even if you're on warfarin, or aspirin.
But they believe it. So,
But they believe it, right. Studies on omega-3 in cancer, some, but not as many as heart disease. I think that's still a ripe area for study. How do we eliminate omega-6s? Well, don't. That's my answer. Typically they're found in vegetable oils. That's the richest sources of them. But there's plenty of good evidence having a higher omega-6 level in their blood, which we measure, is associated with better cardiovascular and diabetic outcomes than having low omega-6. So I don't think omega-6 is the problem.
It's almost like saying don't eat vegetables, because that's any oil out of the vegetable is going to have an omega-6, and we need in general the omega-6s support muscle and the omega-3 support brain. That's kind of a loose definition, but you need more omega-6s than you need omega-3. So
there you go.
Should be avoiding these things.
Quality of fish oil or optimal dose is a question. We recommend people starting, if they're not taking supplements, to start around 1,500 milligrams of EPA DHA a day. Parasol, we do omega-3 index testing and omega quant, but we're partnering with a company called Parasol Nutrition that bundles an omega-3 product, a very nice high concentrate EPA DHA in a triglyceride form. And Parasol is bundling a blood test with bottles of fish oil at a very reasonable price for people, so they can track, monitor their omega-3 levels and see if the fish oil product they're taking, the Parasol Nutrition, is raising their level to 8%. They do a second test. If they're not up to 8%, the recommendation is, add one more pill or something, or you're doing fine. But parasolnutrition.com is the place to look at for a good fish oil supplement along that pairs with testing.
Dr. Harris, Kofi is from England, but he's from Ghana. I've been working with him, Dr. Carter and I, on a program in Ghana, hopefully. But, he says about the ethnicity, and I noticed on your chart that there was an upward blip in Africa, even at the lower omega. And I think, African populations are probably more active than we are. America is one of the most sedentary countries. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
that might bounce you up. But any difference in ethnicities in terms of?
Typically, when we've looked up, we really haven't studied Africans well, African Americans or African Europeans for them, or blacks. They in some studies have higher omega-3 levels, and some studies they have lower. Sometimes some studies there's no difference. It kind of just depends on what's being eaten.
I look at it as we're 99.9% genetically the same.
Yeah.
So these ethnic differences are really more about adaptation. If you're a vegan, the story I tell, if I take a vegan and an Eskimo and change their diet overnight, they're probably both going to feel lousy because of epigenetics. There's the elongase in the retina, which takes the 20 and 22 carbon chains and elongates them up to 28, 32, 36. Eskimos don't need that enzyme turned on, but vegans do. So it's like, I think it's much more about adaptation. So you might have some differences based on geography and culture, but you can adapt to any state. And so I don't see why there would be a difference.
Yeah,
it's critical. It's fundamental to the physiology of humans.
Question about if you're eating salmon twice a week, what serving size? Serving size is roughly 4 ounces and maybe 100 grams is a pretty typical serving size for salmon. The more, the better. Then I see Jackie has put in a thing in the chat about how to purchase omega-3 test or products for self-use, Parasol Nutrition, 10% off code there. Thank you, Jackie.
Can they get this testing kit overseas, or is it only North America based?
No, you can get it overseas. Yeah, it's ordered. We have somebody who handles all that outside of the US.
Excellent.
Who should take omega-3s? Well, I don't know who shouldn't. I guess you do your test, and if your omega-3 index is over 8% and you're not taking supplements, then you don't need to. But that's not going to happen typically. Method groups recommended how many?
Well, Joy brings up a good point about oils in general.
Yeah.
And so like gamma linoleic acid is an important oil for the so-called Schwann cells, which are the insulating layer. So, oils should be a significant part, not 20% of your diet, 30 to 40% probably. And you need all types of oils. So, Dr. Harris made it very clear. He's not opposed to omega-6 oils, omega-9 oils. Borage oil, I'm very bullish on for gamma linoleic acid, or evening primrose oil that a lot of us don't get. I cook with hemp oil, black seed oil. I put in the flax, walnut oil, avocados. So, there's an old expression, variety is the spice of life, but I think the omega-6 and omega-3 sure are at the top of that list. And then, the other ones shouldn't be ignored either.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a question. Why is omega-3 index not standard of care testing? Well, that's my dream that someday it will be. It's because nobody has, partly because there's a bias against nutrition in medicine to begin with. And this is a nutritional factor. To me, the evidence is strong that you should be measuring. If you're going to measure cholesterol, you ought to measure the omega-3 index. It's more predictive of outcomes than cholesterol levels are. But that's a fight that's still going to go on.
Yeah, it's hard to get a vitamin D still. It's improving.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Hollick got thrown out of the Dermatology Society 25 years ago for suggesting people actually get sunshine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Safe sun, I think it was his thing. Yeah. Any home testing kits? Yeah. The Parasol Nutrition, you would get a dry blood spot, a finger stick kit, put a drop of blood on a card, mail it in, and you get back in the mail your results. That's testing is done on Omega Quant. Parasol Nutrition is the one that runs that program. Here's one, why are omega-6 trans fats widely mentioned, but not omega-3 trans fats? Well, there really aren't very many omega-3 trans fats. They don't get they are not part.
They're not hydrogenated.
Not hydrogenated, so right. And the omega-6s aren't, that's not a big problem anyway.
Dr. Harris, it's been amazing. We have a sort of a tradition. We have Dr. Carter, if he has any comments, and then we have Dr. Harshfield, we call land the plane.
Okay, great.
No, that was a fabulous talk there. Really appreciate that, and definitely learned a lot. Absolutely, absolutely.
You can get omega-3s from grass-fed beef, particularly that, from the early spring, high vitamin.
You don't get much. I mean, because they still.
I could have messed up the whole talk by saying you don't have to eat fish. No, you absolutely have to eat the fish, but you can get a little from that. So
you can get, it's really more what you're not getting when you're getting a lot less fat. Somebody just put in the chat difference between omega-3 and cod liver oil. And cod liver oil contains omega-3 along with like vitamin A and vitamin D. Omega-3s are just the fatty acids, EPA and DHA. And so the standard fish oil pill comes from fish body oils, not from fish liver oils. But the cod is unique in storing its fat, its oil in the liver. And so when we get the oil, and by the way, I need Tom, send me that, if you can, that 1948 study about 1848. Yeah. I'd love to.
I'll send you a link to my video on this topic that covers kind of all of it, but not as see, yours is all analytic, which is really important to the concept. Mine was more.
Yeah, so tell me more about fermented fish oils. I honestly don't know much about it.
That would be a Dr. Carter question, because there's been a lot of suggestions that they're better, but not a lot of studies behind it. I don't even know.
Yeah, you can go to Green Pasture. Yeah, they call it the blue ice, and they have several versions of that. So yeah, there's been quite a bit of a controversy on that. I take it as well. But
is it still EPA and DHA?
Well, I mean, it's cod liver oil.
It's cod liver oil.
It's cod liver oil, but it's fermented.
So it produces.
We don't know. Maybe it's more converting the triglycerides. Who knows? The counter ion that makes it more absorbable. That's usually what fermented is. It starts breaking things.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can you put a link to that company in the chat?
Yes. Green Pasture.
Green Pasture. I can also maybe remember that for 5 minutes.
I'll put it down though anyway.
All right, along with your 1848 study.
Well, I'll have to send that to you separately. Green Pastures.
And then they also, they have a product where they combine, well, they call it Factor X, but it's basically the K2 with it.
Okay.
Dr. Harshfield, bring us home.
Land the plane.
Wow, Bill, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our understanding of a lot of these omegas, 3s and 6s, the literature, if you just try to Google the stuff, Wikipedia is just full of, doesn't really help. There was a study out of Brown that had almost 500,000 people that said if they ate more than a serving and a half, I think 7 or 8 ounces of fish a week, they had an increased incidence of melanoma. No one talks about later on, they found out it was mercury poisoning. But I'm just saying, that's why this is so important that you have talks like this. I love chloroplasts because they're the plant-like mitochondria, which apparently is where most of the stuff comes from. And they're really smart because they take photosynthesis, they take light and turn it to biochemical energy, and that's what the omega is about. I'd love to hear you do a presentation soon about omega-6 because they're important. I'm interested in platelets, and you know how that balance goes. They don't make your platelets not work, but they keep you. They don't thin your blood, but they keep you from not having clots, and that's an important point. It's not brought out a lot. But anyway, thank you so much. And I don't know anything about this, by the way. But I know a little more today. Thank you. And I'd love to hear an overview of omega-6s.
Well, maybe one of these days we can do that.
Here we go.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
So I put the link to the 1848 study in there for you. So
great.
That's not the one I read, but I'm looking at it. It's pretty much the same summary.
Good deal. Okay, cool.
Outstanding. I hope everybody gets motivated to eat more fish by taking this quant test and seeing where you really are, and try to get up to 8%. Now we have a target rather than say, I tell people to take a half a shot glass shoot of cod liver oil right after dinner. So you're on a full stomach and you repair at nighttime and all that good stuff. And I think athletes are just breaking down more membranes. So they're just using more lipid. They're just consuming more lipid.
Yeah.
That's what I think's going on there. But outstanding. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you. Great
Thank you,
talk.
Dr. Harris. Great information. It's
Thank you.
appreciated.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
week.